Alrighty, so Tom King is a very divisive writer, I would say, especially when it comes to ongoing series like the one that we're about to discuss today. So my own history with Tom King is I actually have not read his most acclaimed series like Vision or Mr. Miracle. Those are probably his two most highly rated series. He's also done some good indie stuff too, like Helen of Windhorn, which I've also heard good things about, have not read myself just yet. I've got a lot of stuff on my backlog, but I have read his Supergirl Woman Tomorrow, which is also highly acclaimed. I actually was not super big on that one, and he's currently writing on Wonder Woman right now, which has also received similarly divisive reception, just like this Batman run that we're going to talk about. This is probably the most divisive Batman run ever. Like, there doesn't seem to be a wide general consensus. It seems like half the fan base really likes this run for being a deconstruction on the character, exploring mental health topics, which Tom King often does in his writing. Then there's others who think it's overly too dramatic, serious, and they don't like a lot of the dialogue or all the ideas that Tom King introduces. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down this run all the way from issue 1 to 85. This is quite a very long run. This went on for a few years. It was the run that kind of spearheaded one of the runs that was going on during the whole DC Rebirth movement that was happening. And fun fact, this is actually when I started reading comics. I kind of stopped though, like after a while. But yeah, I do have mainly a soft spot for this run, with this being the first Batman run that I read. And then later on, I went on to read, of course, Scott Snyder's run and Grant Morrison's run, which I think my favorite is probably Grant Morrison's. But enough dilly-dallying, let's get into this comic. So before the main run, we have a one-shot, Batman Rebirth, which is actually co-written by Scott Snyder, the guy that was doing the main Batman series during the New 52, and is illustrated by Mikel Janin. So firstly, there's going to be several artists that work on King's run during this, and yeah, I definitely think if there's one thing I can say in favor of the previous run by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo is the fact that those two were on the series for the vast majority of it. I definitely think that helps a series feel more cohesive, as I always hate it whenever an artist just changes during a series or even during the same issue, you know, because it feels a bit jarring. But we'll get more into that later in terms of how I feel about the different art styles that are employed throughout this run, because I do think for the most part a lot of them do work very well. And it's not so jarring when they do change, because it's often for a particular story arc that changes or a particular one-off story. So I think it's done rather well during the series. And specifically with this one, I love how Mikel Janin draws Batman. He just looks stunning, and he is just phenomenal at what he does. And I like this paneling here also, just like resembling a little bat. That's kind of cool. But yeah, I think the artwork is something that has just no complaints from me. It is beautiful. And also this Rebirth suit is honestly a redesign of the suit that I quite like, with the purple going, you know, in the cape. I think like the inside of the cape being purple is just such a cool look. Like, I love it. But anyways, this Rebirth issue is mainly, like, the reason it exists is to tie the bridge between Snyder's New 52 run to kind of act like an epilogue to that, but then also kind of bridge the gap to Tom King's Rebirth run, which starts with David Finch illustrating. As we see some stuff from Snyder's run being brought in, like Duke Thomas arriving at Wayne Manor and training with Bruce, which of course was a dangling thread at the end of Snyder's and Capullo's run. And they also make a point of not making Duke Thomas, like they say, okay, look, he's not going to be the next Robin, but he's something different, still an ally of the Bat family, but he's called Signal, which, to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of that name, or even the costume. I think the costume is not that good, to be honest, and not many writers have really been interested in doing anything with Signal / Duke Thomas, aside from like Scott Snyder himself. I don't know, he just never really left that much of an impression, I guess, amongst readers, and he's not really super important to this run anyway. But yeah, what I do like about this initial one-shot is how they do reinvent the character of Calendar Man as some kind of like supernatural entity that gets reborn with the different seasons and whatnot, which you can probably make some commentaries like, oh, it's just like how this Batman series keeps getting reborn all the time, it's called Rebirth. This whole thing, this whole line of comics is called Rebirth, and maybe I'm looking too much into that, but yeah, he gets reborn And then we get a homage to Batman Year One with Bruce and Duke Thomas training. They're kicking the tree, they're doing that, famous imagery from that comic, which is kind of cool. And also kind of, I suppose, an ongoing theme with DC Rebirth at this time in terms of bringing in old pieces of continuity back into the mainline continuity, because of course New 52 wiped a lot of that stuff away, and now they're bringing back a lot of the post-crisis stuff back into continuity. And now DC's whole approach to continuity is that, like, it's all canon, like all of it is. That's why I try not to worry too much about canon, because if you try to think too hard about it, it will just blow your brain, because it's a nightmare. But anyways, after that concludes, we get the first proper story arc in the mainline Batman series titled I Am Gotham, which is illustrated by David Finch. Now this starts out in a very classic Batman fashion, with Bats meeting Jim Gordon on a rooftop to discuss details of some case, and then bam, an airplane's hit and Batman goes to save the day. Now here, I think what David Finch really excels at is especially the action sequences. They are all absolutely gorgeous to look at, and this little set piece with the plane is really good, and I think that's where King as a writer really excels, is that he knows how to write for the artists and showcase their talent on whatever story they're writing on. We see it here with David Finch on these more action set piece sort of like storylines, like for example this issue with Batman trying to stop a plane from crashing into Gotham, and then we get these gorgeous long page spreads showcasing Batman and all his glory. It is a very exciting action set piece and a great way to start the series. And yeah, we get an instance here of, in this first issue, Batman being prepared to sacrifice his life in this blaze of glory, saving everybody's life on this plane, saving people, from who would have killed if it did crash into Gotham. And then he asks Alfred if his parents would be proud. Is this a good death? Is what he asks Alfred. And he's like, yes, sir, they would be proud. Yeah, here I personally really like this moment, as it helps Batman feel more human, more grounded in a way that kind of moves away from the typical like super capable like Bat God image that being kind of popularized by Grant Morrison in his JLA run, and even more so in his own Batman run, where he's just like this super competent kind of badass loner that's like always prepared for everything. Here it's like, it is genuinely, this is a situation where there's no other outs. He has to kind of sacrifice his life to save the lives of others. And the fact this is in the very first issue, I feel like King's kind of establishing a tone where he's going to be exploring a more human side to the Batman character. But yeah, Batman is saved by two brand new superheroes, Gotham and Gotham Girl, which obviously not the most creative names for new characters. Gotham and Gotham Girl almost sounds like a parody, to be honest. But yeah, that's how the first issue ends. And it's kind of setting up this whole idea of Batman teaching these two new superheroes how to be superheroes, as the next issue starts off with Batman fighting Solomon Grundy with Gotham and Gotham Girl, and then him kind of lecturing Gotham, being like, look, if you were more efficient and did like this, then this guy wouldn't have been like here. That's why I had to step in and stop him. Kind of showing them how to be better superheroes. Even though they have more superhuman abilities, they're basically like the discount Superman, right? But obviously they don't know really how to be the best superheroes, how to save people. And the reason Batman decides to train these two new superheroes under his belt is he kind of realizes his own vulnerability as just kind of a person, having come so close to death. And then he kind of monologues to himself, being like, the one day I will die, then Dick will take the mantle, and then Dick will die as well. So he's honestly considering passing on his legacy to these two new Gotham superheroes. Now, of course, in comics, Batman is never ever going to retire or die. He might die, but then he'll get brought back to life later. So this is a hypothetical scenario, because obviously in the nature of comic books, Batman is forever. But in this situation, Batman's obviously at some point going to need a successor. And honestly, I think this is a solid premise for a storyline. Like the idea of Batman mentoring two superpowered human beings, I think works very well. And this moment it's a little cute, I'll admit, when they meet on the rooftop with Gordon, and then Batman does his disappearing act, and then Gotham and Gotham Girl are like, well, where did he go? And they got their ultravision on and they can't see him. It is a bit of an overdone joke at this point, with like Batman doing the disappearing thing, and this is another one of those jokes. It is a bit overdone, but it is a little cute, I'll say that. And then Gordon, of course, has his like, nah, that's not impossible, that's Batman line. So there is some cheese in there, but I'm fine with a little cheese. I don't mind it. And we also find out Gotham's origin, you know, the superhero, which draws a parallel almost to Batman's own origin before, you know, with the whole that going into an alley, there's parents, there's a mugger, but this time obviously Batman's there to save the parents, and the child kind of watches Batman. Then Batman has his whole line in there. His line is, everyone gets scared. But remember, all that means is everyone gets the opportunity to fight that fear. Everyone gets a chance to be brave. And he says this as he's grappling away, which I'm just thinking, bro, this kid cannot hear him as he's saying this. Next time, you know, you might want to be within earshot to say this to the kid. I don't know how he's able to hear this, but whatever, it's the art doing its own thing. And that's how Gotham kind of looks up to Batman and why he wants to kind of help people and stuff. And then him and his sister, Claire, they get their hands on some kind of superpower drug and then they become superheroes. And yeah, Bruce finds out all this in his undercover as Matches Malone when he's like interviewing the parents. So that's a fun nod to Matches Malone. I always love that. Later in this issue, we get like Gotham and Gotham Girl like on a bridge. There's like an action set piece scene. Anyways, after this whole bit, we get a sequence where Gotham and Gotham Girl go to this place and they meet Psycho Pirate, and then the issue ends, and then we cut to the next bit, and then we see the aftermath of what's happened. So with the broad strokes here, what happens is Psycho Pirate makes Gotham Girl go a bit mad, a bit crazy. So she's being looked after in the Batcave, and then Gotham goes super nuts. He goes like killing crazy. He starts killing soldiers, and you know, Batman needs to stop him before he destroys Gotham. But before that, we see him trying to like save people, and then we get this homage to All-Star Superman here, where he goes to this guy who he thinks is trying to like kill himself and jump off a building, but it turns out the guy is like a bomber and he's like unsure what to do. So there's a little subversion of that. But what I find interesting is like how this scene, as I mentioned, directly mirrors All-Star Superman, with the panel layout being exactly the same. It is very obviously a homage to that iconic scene that gets shared around all over Twitter. It is an incredible moment in that comic. And comparing both these scenes side by side, what I find most striking is how it kind of establishes a clear difference between Gotham and Superman, and why Gotham just can't compare to the peak that is Superman. You know, he's just not him. Obviously with All-Star Superman, we see that Superman is helping inspire the girl by, you know, telling him he believes in her. Whereas Gotham, conversely, you know, is all about him. He's talking about believe in me. Don't believe in you, believe in me. I think that's really trying to underscore like the type of like hero Gotham is, where he's trying to kind of, you know, he's sniffing his own farts. Whereas Superman, he's not like that. He is Superman. He's there for everyone. Whereas Gotham is just kind of, he's trying to hype himself up. And maybe that's why his situation is more dark, where the guy explodes himself. Pretty dark stuff. Anyways, towards the end of the storyline, we get Batman taking on Gotham, and this is actually a part that I really like, where it's Alfred going in as Batman, dressed up as Batman. I believe this is the new 52 suit he is wearing, and of course Batman's wearing his newer suit. But yeah, he's in the Batmobile, we get some Alfred narration, and then he just like pops out of the Batmobile, and Gotham's like, what the fuck is this? He's like, are you trolling me right now? And Alfred's like, I am Batman. And then Batman comes in to rescue. That's a very funny moment. I like that a lot. In fact, I think the writing of this in this particular storyline is very strong for both Bruce and Alfred. I feel like their dialogue is top notch. Alfred hits it with sarcastic, witty remarks. That British dry humor is excellent. There's many different instances of that really being strong, especially with when they're just in the cave together, kind of having that rapport, or like in the mansion. And you know, Bruce is like, I don't trust anyone, not even Alfred. And then Alfred makes like a remark about Bruce's birthday when he was like 12 years old or something. It's just, the writing is really strong there. And again, kind of repeating what I said about David Fincher's art, the action sequences here are so good. They're gritty, they're fun, they're exciting, and the dialogue, you know, it can be seen as like a bit cheesy at times with the typical like the one-liners and whatever. You got Batman kind of talking about, if you want to hurt Gotham, hurt me, because I am Gotham, or something like that. I think it's done well though in this storyline. I think it's fun. And then we get the Justice League showing up to kind of clown on Gotham, but then it turns out Gotham turns out to be even more powerful because his superpowers are kind of linked to like he's able to be stronger than the Justice League, but his powers kind of have a effect where the more he uses up his superpowered energy, the shorter his lifespan is. So eventually Gotham Girl comes out, fights Gotham, and then Gotham dies. So rest in peace to Gotham. A criticism I'm going to levy towards this arc is that I definitely feel like this whole storyline was a bit too rushed. In particular, Gotham's characterization, because we're introduced to Gotham in the last panel of issue 1, and then issue 2 and 3 of this storyline, trying to build him up as a good guy. And then with the next issue, issue 4, he does a complete 180, and becomes crazy and psycho. And then issue 5, the Justice League come in, and then we get the whole fight sequence, and then he dies. It's a very quick character arc there. I think it would have been better for this to have more oomph behind it if we were able to kind of build up to this gradually, but I also kind of get it in the sense that maybe Gotham isn't that important in the whole grand scheme of things, because Gotham, you could probably argue, is more there to be like Gotham Girl's sort of like Uncle Ben type figure. Like Gotham is there to really serve Gotham Girl's sort of character arc, because obviously it seems like Tom King was mainly building up to Gotham Girl being a bigger thing, because she shows up throughout this whole run from beginning to end. But still, I think this would have improved if it was a bit more drawn out, but yeah. Okay, the next story arc is I Am Suicide, and here we get Mikhail Janin, I don't even know how to say the name. Is it Janin or just like Janin? Is the J silent? I don't even know, but he's back on the art, and this storyline follows Batman putting together his own Suicide Squad to face off against Bane in Santa Prisca. And the reason he does this is that he needs to retrieve the villain Psycho Pirate, whose powers are to manipulate people's emotions. We saw him in the last arc. He made Gotham Girl kind of traumatized, and the reason, of course, Batman does all this is that he needs Psycho Pirate to cure Gotham Girl, who has been mentally damaged by the Psycho Pirate. And I think how this arc starts out is actually very interesting, as we get a bit of humanization for Bane. With Bane's narration, we get, of course, kind of the flashback to the iconic origin story of Bane, seen in Vengeance of Bane by Chuck Dixon. But here, it's more of like, instead of the kind of narration in that comic, like it is from the perspective of how people kind of mythologize Bane as this child who went through this hardship. Here, this is kind of told from Bane's perspective himself, and he's kind of talking about how there were like some nights where he just wanted to give up and like die, essentially. And we see Bane has had it pretty rough, and I think it's an interesting narration device that we get, and kind of learning more about kind of Bane's motivation here for wanting Psycho Pirate to kind of help cure himself of his own trauma. Interesting stuff. As mentioned, Tom King is very much interested in exploring characters' trauma, and later on in the next arc we get more of a direct parallel between Batman and Bane. But even here in the story, we can see the whole idea is that kind of like suicidal ideation is common between these two characters. But yeah, I'm gonna get straight into some criticisms towards this art, actually, this story, because of how much I praised Mikhail Janin before, and also David Finch on the last arc. I think the art here can sometimes be a bit confusing with these double page spreads, and like kind of how the action scenes in particular are mapped out, where you'll see same character like multiple times in the same page. I remember one instance of like Catwoman and ventriloquist Arnold Wesker in like the sewers, and like seeing that with how that was kind of plotted out, just being kind of super confusing to look at, and it's done like multiple times throughout this arc. And yeah, I don't know, it didn't work for me, but overall I think of course the art itself is great, although I don't think it translates super well to action sequences quite like David Finch's art does, because I see with it resembling more sort of like real human kind of looking art compared to David Finch's. It kind of has a similar effect to like Alex Ross's art, where the movement isn't so kinetic. It feels very much like you're looking at like a still painting in this moment, and it makes the action sequences feel a little less exciting than it does in David Finch's work. But still, I think where it excels is the conversations, how those look, how people look in general, especially Catwoman. Like, oh my lord, she is stunning. Everyone is stunning here, actually. Everybody looks beautiful. We even get a naked Bane, so that's something too. But yeah, I thought this was a fun bit of story here, that we got a fun sort of like group, this Suicide Squad. They had a little fun dynamic. It is well written. I do think this is a better like proper kind of starting point for the art than I'm Gotham is, because we do get Catwoman established here. We get Bane, who is the central villain of this whole run, established here. This does feel like this is probably where the arc or this whole run should have started. Nonetheless, it is what it is. We also get this moment where Batman breaks into Santa Prisca and is overlaid with narration, or rather a letter that he's written for Catwoman that was intended for Selina to read, and we get to read that letter overlaid on top of this whole action sequence. And it's basically Bruce talking about him becoming Batman and his attempted suicide shortly after his parents died, and how he made this whole vow to spend the rest of his life warring on criminals. And this, I think some people are going to be divided on it, because obviously it is very dark, and it is, I guess, portraying initially in how the story starts out an image of Batman it kind of plays on the idea of Bruce Wayne kind of viewing Batman as a way to almost like slowly kill himself, if that makes sense, like that whole idea of being Batman. And we see that in how this whole run starts out with Batman saving the plane and how he almost dies and he's fully prepared to sacrifice himself. I guess you could read that as like him kind of wanting to die as Batman. And personally, I thought it was very striking to actually see Bruce kind of admit to struggling with his own mental health and his depression with this attempted suicide. And again, some people probably think, okay, we don't need this heavy sort of subject matter in a superhero comic book, but personally, I think it works really well for the Batman character. It is dark, and when done well, that can be really powerful stuff, and I think it works very well here. And we've also seen like a similar thing in other sort of adaptations, like in Gotham, they did a similar thing where Bruce kind of self-harmed himself with like a candle flame, I believe. So it is something that we've seen before. And as I mentioned, I think the whole idea of kind of Bruce kind of viewing Batman as almost like kind of self-harming himself is a very compelling idea. I think people kind of simplify it as like Batman is just like sad and suicidal, that's what this whole arc is about. But it's important to note that this is kind of just establishing an idea that is going to be built on throughout later in this run. This isn't like the grand central thesis on Batman that, okay, yeah, Batman always has to be depressed, always has to be, yada yada this, yada yada that. This is kind of establishing a character arc for Bruce, and that this direct thing, like this narration and this vow, is going to be brought up later. This is all long spanning storyline. And I feel like when looked at in that lens, it is easier to understand what Tom King is going for, rather than looking at just this one initial kind of issue and then not taking account the whole storyline, the whole character arc that Tom King is building up to. And of course, I mentioned it before, but Selina Kyle is in this run, and she's going to be a major focus throughout this whole storyline, because the romance aspect of Batman is something that is very important to Tom King. And some people don't like the romance aspect of Batman. I feel like generally it's always played on as a tragedy that, Batman can't be in a relationship and also be Batman, because Batman is like what he's really, as his one true passion right there. But I think the relationship that's built up, first of all, Catwoman always, to me, is the number one love interest for Batman. I think they work very well as a couple. Ever since I read it, one of my first Batman comics I read was Batman Hush, and I think that those two just work very well. So I'm very happy that Tom King kind of made this one of his focal points of this run, was to focus on that romance. But if that's not your cup of tea, then definitely avoid this run like the plague, because there is a lot of cat repeated later on. And speaking of the dialogue, I'm going to talk briefly about the rooftops sort of arc, which is just like a 2-issue storyline that's kind of slotted in between the I Am Suicide and I Am Bane storyline. And this shows up many times. It's not just this part, but many times we get that repeated dialogue between characters, where one character will say something and then another character will repeat that. And a lot of people think the dialogue from Tom King can feel a little stilted, and he does a similar thing to Brian Michael Bendis, where he's attempting to make the dialogue sound and feel realistic as how real people talk with that repetition. And personally, I like it some of the times, and I think it does work. It is very poetic, actually. There's a lot of monologues too that we'll get from characters, and it can definitely, some people see it slowing down the pace, but personally, I like it. I think, again, it works well for this character. But yeah, to conclude the I Am trilogy, we have I Am Bane, which follows directly after the last arc, and this primarily takes place over the course of 5 days, with Batman attempting to fend off Bane's attacks, while he uses a Psycho Pirate's abilities to heal the fractured mind of Gotham Girl, of course with Alfred there to help, with a gun to Psycho Pirate's head. But I'm jumping up a bit, I'm getting ahead of myself, because first we need to talk about Batburger. Batburger, this is some kind of fast food chain that's in the DC universe, that is Batman themed, and they do things that are themed after Batman's rogues galleries as well. We get not just his rogue galleries, but also Bat Family. We have Nightwing's you know, and of course we can jokerize your fries. I thought this was a very cute moment. I liked it a lot. I thought this was a lot of fun, especially that Jason's eating Joker fries. That's definitely something. A horrific moment is that we see Bruce Wayne eating a burger with a knife and fork, which is like, oh my god. When I saw that, I just wanted to just like throw up. And Duke Thomas comments on that as well. It's like, seriously, that's how you eat a burger? It's that was just, no, I'm sorry. In a superhero comic with all this, you know, crazy superpowered beings and like action set pieces and whatever, this was where I could not suspend my disbelief. No person eats a burger like that. That is insane. Not even Bruce Wayne, this billionaire. I thought that was a cute moment. What I did not like though was the fake out of the Bat family's death. So they established like in the scene where they're eating and then Bruce Lee's being like, no, you cannot get involved with Bane. Because Batman always does this. It's kind of annoying. He always pushes away the Bat family when they could be still be like, no, this is something for me to take care of. So then the Robins are talking amongst each other and they're like, okay, let's take out Bane ourselves. And then the end of the issue, when Batman's walking into the Batcave, we then see 3 of the Robins hanged up with I Am Bane written over them. And we think, oh my god, Bane took down the Robins single-handedly off screen and killed them? No, it's death fake out. Turns out they're not actually dead. And he puts them in the Fortress of Solitude with Superman to like rest up. And I think this is cheap because it's a very cheap way to kind of write the Bat family out of a storyline. And I think this would have been more interesting if they were more involved out of like Batman interacting with his family a bit more overall, but whatever. It's written in a way where it's like, okay, so this has to be a Batman soloing Bane sort of thing. Whatever. What I will say though is that of course the action still kicks ass, as I've mentioned. We get some great moments. A bit cheesy with like, we get a lot of the I am Bane and then I am Batman type lines. We get that quite a lot actually. Batman says that really a lot now that I'm noticing that. He's just like, it's because I'm Batman. He literally says because I'm Batman. It's like it's how it should have ended. I'm Batman because I'm Batman. But anyways, I think I Am Bane, I think it works well as a story here, especially looking like at the previous storyline, If I Am Suicide, and this one kind of playing on the tropes of Nightfall and kind of reversing them, kind of being a subversion. Because obviously in I Am Suicide, if we look at that as like a reverse Nightfall, it's kind of Bane who kind of plays that role of Bruce Wayne. They even play on that with like Bruce literally breaking Bane's back. It's obviously meant to be a direct reference to Nightfall when Bane broke Batman's back. And in this instance, it's not Bane breaking into Batman's turf, this is Batman breaking into Bane's turf. And I thought that's an interesting way to kind of play on that. You know, he's taken away Bane's happiness through the way of taking away Psycho Pirate, and then he breaks his own back. And here Arkham Asylum plays a part, kind of like Arkham Asylum played a part in Nightfall, of course. Here we get a parallel between Bane and Batman being drawn up in these panels, where we can see they're both born from trauma and how they do different things with their trauma. They both wear masks, of course. They're both defined by just their mental issues. Batman, as mentioned in the last storyline, is born of a child's suicide attempt. You know, not a hero's dream really. And Bane's life has always been, you know, not very good. I mean, he's had to like swim, almost be drowned all the time. And here what we get is Bane fighting all of the Arkham villains before facing down Batman, which is an exact reverse of Nightfall as well. Because in Nightfall, it was Batman in Arkham getting tired out by all of his rogues gallery. And here now it's Bane being tired down before facing Batman. So we're doing a reversed Nightfall in these two storylines. And we get this moment as well where Batman sees his mother and has a conversation with her, and he essentially puts his foot down and declares that, like, you know, Batman is hope. You know, he's a superhero, he has to help those in need, and that's kind of what makes Batman good, whilst Bane is kind of like, he's more so trapped in his own sort of like vengeance and whatever, you know, because Bane's obviously not a hero. And it's this like conversation as well that will lead into Bruce eventually proposing to Selina, but we'll get to that. Overall, I think this is a fun storyline. This is a fun, especially the action is very well done. And then after this we get the button, which, you know, leads into Doomsday Clock, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but it is, I guess, you know, it is fun seeing Batman face off against Reverse Flash. That's like, I don't know, it's just cool. It is very cool to see that Batman kind of out of his depth here in a fight that he can't beat, and so he does it in a very Batman fashion where he's just trying to play for time, and the way it's done with each panel is like a second, which doesn't entirely make sense because they have all this fucking like dialogue speech bubbles, and there's no way Batman could say all of this in a second. I guess like Reverse Flash, he can probably speed up the way he's talking because he's like a speedster, but there's like look at all of this dialogue here. This is meant to be in 1 second. When you blur, you can't stand steady. Like already I've past the 1 second mark just saying that. There's no way you can say Batman would have had to be like, when you blur, you can't stand steady or something. So you're like, oh my god. Yes, like he can't say all of that in 1 second. It is implausible. But aside from that, and of course this whole comic issue is playing on the Watchmen's, like, you know, famous 9-panel grid formula, because this is directly related to Watchmen, this whole action bit here, which is fun, it's cute. And the main thing that this storyline establishes is bringing back the Thomas Wayne Batman and having him talk to Bruce, and he has this whole message where he's like, look, get rid of being Batman. He wants his son to stop being Batman in terms to find happiness. And whilst Batman can never truly stop being Batman, he does take some of this to heart, of, as we'll see later on, with the marriage proposal. But before we get onto that, we also get a one-shot storyline here, The Brave and the Mold, which is a team up between Batman and Swamp Thing. I think the artwork is just awesome. The dialogue's incredible, the characterization between Batman and Swamp Thing is very well done, and it has a very strong ending, which I will not spoil, but it's definitely worth reading for yourself. This is Batman issue 24, if I'm getting the numbers right. I believe it's 24, maybe it's 23, I don't know, I don't remember like specific issue numbers really. Maybe I should have written it down, but yeah, this is a very good storyline. Like, there's just so many good single issue or like 2-issue storylines in this run, and I prefer that over this grand story that he's kind of telling with Bane here. But yeah, this is definitely one to read. And then of course we get the proposal issue coming after this, where Batman proposes to Catwoman. This is kind of also, we get Clayman drawing this alongside David Finch. We get both those artists, and the Clayman stuff focuses on Batman talking to Gotham Girl, and this is where we get that line where Batman's like, look, I'm Batman because I'm Batman, which I think, I get what Tom King's trying to say, but I think that could have been worded in a less cheesy way. And maybe he could have said something like, I'm Batman because I have to be, not I'm Batman because I'm Batman. It's just like the most Batman thing to say. But yeah, I really like this issue. It's very existential. We get Batman kind of talking about his feelings, talking about like that he's just not happy. He does this to be happy and he's just not feeling satisfied. And it ends up with him kind of proposing to Selina. And I really, at the time when this was coming out, this was super exciting. I was like, oh my god, Batman and Catwoman, the proposal? This was like, I wish they stuck with this, because this would have been so cool. I wish this was the status quo, because man, Batman deserves love. Like, he can be happy and be a crime fighter, man. Superman does it. Superman's, has Lois. After this, we get the War of Jokes and Riddles, which is a flashback storyline.